Hello, and welcome back to UK Market Missions, day 7, penultimate day of the formal program. And we have a couple of really amazing panel sessions today. And before I introduce the first panel, quick recap on the 2 masterclasses yesterday, those of you that were there. Chris Walcott and Graham Cade of Savanta, I think gave an excellent masterclass around doing your research, and certainly I would hope that many of you have taken away some fantastic insights about the importance of research, and of course how much research you really need to do. So any more information required, just come back to us and we'll do an intro to the research facilities. And then of course Jerry and Martina talked about branding and so forth. The Edelman team is super quality, and they were there once again to help you with your market positioning and branding, which once again we know is very important when entering a new marketplace. And of course I have to remind you about the sign-ups for the pitch day next Tuesday. The deadline is midday tomorrow, Thursday, obviously we're having a session, second session tomorrow. We'll talk you through what's required and what's expected on the pitch day for any of you that are unsure. And of course, the newfound team will be hanging on in this session later to answer any questions you may have. Now, on to today's sessions, data and technology considerations in the UK and Europe. It's pretty important stuff. And occasionally companies fall foul of things like GDPR and how they keep their data, and it can be very expensive, which I'm sure we'll hear about in a few minutes. So introducing the panel, the moderator, he is in fact my brother Paul Gillingwater. He is a GDPR expert. Every family needs one. So Paul will be moderating, and then we've got Casey Lee Nielsen, who's a data and protection solicitor from Uri Clark, and Uri Clark of course have been supporting us throughout the program. And fantastic sort of lawyers and accountants. And then Julie Ingov, legal counsel of TrueLayer. TrueLayer, I believe, has raised a ton of money recently. This week it was announced, so I'm sure Julie has been burning the midnight oil. And then Stephen Quigg. Stephen, thank you for joining us. Principal Security Solution Architect from AWS, the 900-pound gorilla in the cloud. No further ado, just pass you on to Paul to start moderating, and thank you for joining us.
Julie, why don't you start?
Sure. So I'm Julie Ngo. I'm a legal counsel at TrueLayer, and I am the lead data protection advisor in-house. I actually started my life growing up in Adelaide before moving to London 10 years ago, and worked in leveraged finance, moved to the Home Office, then started consulting for a few startups who wanted to move to the UK, and eventually made my way into tech. Started a career working with Zoopla and Uswitch, before finding a role as the first legal counsel at TrueLayer, which has been really, really exciting.
All right, I'll go next. Hi, I'm Casey. So I'm a data protection and employment solicitor at Uri Clark Solicitors. We're a little bit unique because we're both solicitors and accountants. So our firm specializes in inward investment. So we go across the world and we basically help companies come to the UK and set up. What's unique about us is we're sort of a one-stop shop. We give you both the accountancy and legal perspective, which are often issues that we find businesses have when two sides are arguing different things, whereas we come together and hopefully argue the same thing or give advice around setting up in the UK in one setting. And so today I'll be helping you guys chat about your data protection considerations from a legal angle.
Thanks, Casey. I'm Stephen Quigg, call me Squig, from AWS, all my customers do. I've been at AWS 7.5 years now. At the start and at the heart of our financial services journey, I lead security for many financial services customers in AWS, from the largest banks in the world to the smallest fintech startups in the world. I live in the UK, so I'm humbled enough to get to spend a lot of time with startups in London and across Europe. And I can help you think of the considerations as you build and scale your business and you want to enter new markets. I help a lot of our customers do that. How can you use our cloud to help power that journey? We've been very fortunate in that many of the very high profile fintech companies all run on AWS, from companies like Stripe down to customers like transfer-wise as well. And I'd like to help share some of the lessons that we learned from those customers with you. Paul, do you have audio yet?
Yes, sorry about the technical issues there. Slight issue which is now resolved. Thank you very much, Stephen. It's very much an honor to be part of such a panel with Casey, yourself, and Julie. A little bit of a background on myself. I'm something of an internet pioneer. I started my first internet business in 1989. Yes, that's a true statement. Since then, I've been working in cybersecurity over the past 30 odd years. And for the past 5 years, I've been focusing on data protection and the rights of privacy of individuals. I work for a management consulting company here in London called Chaucer Consulting, and we help businesses with their data journeys. So today's journey is all about you, however, the viewers of this presentation and panel. We're here to answer your questions and to help to guide your thoughts and suggestions about how to deal with the challenges of manifesting your business and expanding in the UK and the EU. And in particular, dealing with some of the myriads of challenges, GDPR for one. Every time I say the term Brexit to some of our customers, they roll their eyes and say, none of us know what's happening. And so hopefully we'll be able to provide a little bit of insight and guidance in what might be happening in that area, particularly how it's going to affect the financial services sector. And so I'd like to begin perhaps by asking Casey to talk a little bit about her experience. How do you see Brexit as having an impact on new entrants coming into the UK and EU markets? Over to you.
Thanks. So a topic that always seems to come up for the last 4 years, we can never get rid of it, and I think it's just going to be sticking around. So basically, from a data protection angle, GDPR and data protection are here to stay. They're not going away, even though we're leaving the EU. We're still, the provisions will still apply. Essentially, GDPR applies to all companies based in the EU or those who deal with EU citizens' data. So if you're coming across to set up in the EU and you're dealing with EU citizens' data, it's going to apply to you no matter whether we leave, whether Brexit happens or not. I mean, it's happening, but whether how strong it is or whether it's a weak Brexit deal, GDPR is still going to apply to you. So essentially, it's going to be exactly the same as it is right now. We've had some noise from the government that they might want to try and implement some deviation from the regime, but certainly for the time being, our assumption is that, yes, it's going to be the same. I think the one thing that is probably key to note is that the UK faces the prospect of being regarded as a third country when it exits the EU. And as a result, the transfer of personal data from organisations within the UK to other organisations in the EU might be subject to stricter transfer provisions, which are currently effective, for example, if you're transferring data from the EU to Australia and back and forth. So these rules are set out, I'm going to be a boring lawyer quickly, under Articles 46 and 47. If you did want to take a look at that, you'll need to look at stricter transfer provisions under there. But it's essentially about, it'll still essentially be about the UK demonstrating to the EU that they are a safe place to process data. And right now, we're still waiting to see what the result of that's going to be.
Thank you, Casey. Julie, how do you think companies who are dealing with banking data are going to be affected by some of the regulatory changes which are occurring in this sector? I know that, for example, the EU really is pushing a lot of initiatives to transform itself into a data-driven economy. Is that going to be something that needs to be taken into account by entrants into the EU and UK markets?
At this point, it probably helps for me to give you some context about TrueLayer. So we make it easy to integrate financial services like open banking into any app or website and help companies access banking account transactions of their end users. And we provide basically account information services and payment initiation services under open banking and PSD2. But to address Paul's question, I think it's the exact same principles that Casey outlined. All this banking data is effectively personal data that is protected under provisions of the GDPR. So, excuse me, to the extent that you are transferring this information across from the EU to the UK, all of those protections that you need to make sure are in place, as Casey outlined, would need to exist. So that's sort of like a level of extra steps that you might have to consider when you are acting in a cross-border manner.
Thank you, Julie. Stephen, you're the guy here with the technical hat. Is dealing with these issues a technical problem? Does it have an impact on the technology? The questions about data residency, does that come into play when you're thinking about backup or deployment strategies? How do you see things panning out in this environment?
It's partly a technical problem, but more to the point, technology can make the business problem much simpler. There are ways of doing things that will help your business as it scales, so that choices that you make early can make it easy to copy what you've done. Say, let's use the AWS cloud. We have regions all over Europe. We have regions all over Asia. We have regions all over the Americas. We have customers who then decide to enter new markets. And that can be much easier for them to take their entire technology stack and clone it in another AWS region, for example, and make it really simple for themselves to meet local regulations by deploying locally. Or, in many instances, they may want to centralize systems, deliver them remotely, but then they need to have chosen a cloud provider that gives them the global provisions so that they can run anywhere and still meet the underlying principles of GDPR. So, for example, our cloud helps customers comply with GDPR because we deliver our services in a GDPR compliant manner. And very common questions from customers where, I'm in Australia, do I need to keep my data in the London data centers for UK customers? And the answer, as I'm sure all of you know, is no, you don't. But the technical measures and the security controls you put around it are very important. So what I'd say is that technology is part of this. The early technology choices that you make can have a huge impact on you down the line. So be thoughtful as you look at Amazon. We've got this phrase, we talk about one-way doors and two-way doors. Two-way doors are easily reversible decisions. One-way doors are the things that you should carefully consider before moving through them because you can't go backwards. And I'd say looking at your data architecture early on and how you can manage it and how you can move things about is one of those one-way doors for you.
So, Stephen, if I understand correctly, you're suggesting that the architecture of how you put your data strategy together has a very strong regulatory influence, and that data architects need to take advice from lawyers, I guess. Would that be a fair statement?
It is a fair statement. You know, many customers ask us and say, is what I'm doing GDPR compliant? And we have to say, listen, here's some guidance, but ultimately GDPR isn't something you can just comply with. It's a legal framework. You should seek legal counsel so that they can look at you in your context and help you understand if you're doing the right thing. All we can do is enable you to do the right thing, if you like, but we can also enable you to do the wrong thing. Ultimately, our customers have to make these choices, and that's why we advise them to seek good legal counsel around it.
Well, talking of good legal counsel, Casey, over to you. This is clearly a set of questions that must be coming to you on a regular basis from customers who are looking for guidance. What would be the top tips that you would give to companies that perhaps may have already established a beachhead in the EU or the UK and are looking for guidance about how they should proceed with implementing their systems? What would you suggest?
I mean, off the back of what Stephen said, exactly what he said, your lawyers and tech people need to work together on this. It isn't a one person's job, that person's job. It really, you do need to work together, because as much as your lawyers can advise, this is how you need to be compliant, you might not have the technology that's appropriate in order to do that. Same thing, your tech guys might be saying this is how our systems work, but your lawyers might be like, well, that's completely wrong, or that's not how we suggest, or there's a better way to do it, things like that. So you've got to work together. But I'd say my main tip basically would be that people are becoming more and more aware that their data is increasingly valuable. And for companies to realize that, that's essential. You need to realize that you can make money out of the data that you hold. It's a truly valuable thing that you've got. And as long as you've got the right permissions, the right structure and everything in place at the get-go, this can help you throughout. It's not a simple tick box exercise that you've got at the beginning. And once you've ticked it all, you're done, you're GDPR compliant. It's an ongoing compliance journey. So what we advise our clients is we set them on a compliance journey. And I emphasize on the word journey. It's not a one stop, you've stuck a piece of tape on it, that's it, you're done, you're compliant. It's forever ongoing. Sorry, Karen, yeah.
So could we talk a little bit about risk? What are the risks that businesses are facing when they're starting their data journey, and how do they deal with those risks?
I would say I think the first risk is assuming that it is a quick exercise. Second risk being that they don't have the support from the board or from your finance team behind you. GDPR compliance, it is a long journey. It's an expensive journey, and people need to be aware that it unfortunately it is going to cost money. However, the risk of being non-compliant is also going to cost you money. If you've obviously got the breaches, the potentials of fines, but more importantly for your business, there's the reputational damage to consider and the loss of your customers and employees' confidence in your company. And I think that consideration is very important, and the lack of competitive advantage if you don't have the right structures in place. It was a barrier to your investment and hard efforts in coming to the EU or to the UK.
Julie, your company provides an API which provides businesses with a competitive advantage, with an opportunity to integrate banking information. How would you advise your customers if they come to you and say, hey, we have a big problem, but we have to make a decision? Do we emphasize investment in the business, or do we build a better platform, or do we just focus on marketing and leave the regulatory aside because it's not enforced?
That's a tricky one, because I think all of it has to come together, and depending on at what stage you are as a startup, you may have emphasis on one of these sort of priorities at any one time. So, but I have to say that if you are a regulated business, it's important to get that right, as we are. We are regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, and the two main pieces of law that we operate under are the Payment Services Directive, or PSD2, and the GDPR, and the two overlap, and we have to comply with both. And we've set ourselves up from the beginning to make sure that we do comply with both, in terms of the way the customer flows through our auth dialogues, for example, to make sure that we get the right consents, to make sure the consents are granular, and to make sure that only the data that they've requested to be passed on is passed on, and nothing extra. So I think from that sort of strong foundation, we've then been able to put together a marketing campaign that says, hello, we're TrueLayer, and we're here to help you access your end users' account information to help you deliver the services that you want to deliver. And a lot of people do come to us because we can, hand on our heart, say that we don't store any of that information. As soon as that information is retrieved and passed on to you, as a customer, we don't actually store any of it. We don't do anything with it unless it's anonymized. So I think having the right regulatory basis then builds the rest of your priorities in terms of marketing and the way you talk about your business and the way you structure it.
Thank you. I see we have our first question from Venkatesh Krishnamurthy. He asks, is it sufficient to seek payers' consent to store their data, that is non-card data, and store in UK data centers. So, Stephen, would you like to have a crack at that? Because I think you're the expert on data centers.
Customers should seek their own independent legal advice as to what is compliant with the law or not. Full stop. How some customers do different things. I don't know under which legal basis they may be doing so, for example. Now, if you came and asked me my water cooler opinion on it, I'd say that the locality of your data is typically less important than the control framework around your data. However, that varies by regulator, that varies by country. I would ask my learned friend, Casey, could probably give a better answer. Don't ask me legal questions.
Love to put you on the spot. Casey, over to you.
That's fine. I'll jump in there quickly. So what we try to mainly advise, not mainly, but what we strongly advise our clients is to steer away from consent. The issue with consent is that it can be easily withdrawn. So as long it can be okay. Yes, you've got this specific unambiguous consent from someone. Great, you can process that data. But the moment they withdraw that consent, you can't do it anymore if that is the only legal basis that you're relying on. So we always try to say rather rely on something that's a little bit more stronger. For example, the obligation of a contract. So if you've got something between you and this individual, the reason you're processing their personal data is in order to fulfill the contract that you've got with them. That's a much stronger legal basis for you to carry on doing that. So that's one of the huge pieces of advice that we do often try to encourage our clients, because consent they think is the easiest way, and it's I would say the most difficult one, because it can be easily withdrawn, and there's such a strict way of strict granular way of the way you need to obtain consent that it's often not the best way to go.
If I can toss a follow-up to you, Casey, yeah. Have you anecdotally, how comfortable are your customers with preparing legitimate interest assessments if they choose that lawful basis for proceeding?
It is a very muddy water area, definitely for all my clients. I think they often get confused that they think because by tick boxing their legitimate interest assessment, there's sort of a questionnaire thing you can do, that once they've passed that, it's absolutely fine to keep doing it. But I think you really do need to assess, are your data subjects' rights overridden? Do they override your business needs? And I think a lot of businesses sometimes fudge that.
Yeah, if I may, very briefly, as I'm sure you're fully aware, one of the areas of confusion for many people who are starting this journey is understanding how the word risk is used in GDPR terms, in data protection terms. Because when we're talking about risk, we're not necessarily focusing on IT risk or cybersecurity risk or technical risk, but actually we're really interested in what are the risks to the rights and freedoms of data subjects, of individuals. I wonder if you could perhaps talk a little bit about that emphasis of difference and why the rights, the human rights of data subjects are paramount, and whether you feel that this has an impact on the business decisions that are being made by entrants to the EU markets.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's essentially the fundamental point of why GDPR came in. It was to give that power back to individuals, that their data is theirs. It should no longer be owned and controlled by companies. And I think individuals are starting to become a lot more aware that their data is valuable. They are the ones who should be controlling it and determine who's got it, who hasn't. And that's exactly it. Your company needs to look at to see whether what you are processing does it inflict the individual's rights, their interests and their freedoms. And that's exactly what the EU Commission will look at the UK when they're determining whether we're an adequate country to transfer data from the EU to the UK. Does the UK breach those fundamental rights? And sort of off the back of that, that's why, just as a side note, that's why the Privacy Shield was repealed from the US. The whole fact that they the EU Commission views them as breaching those fundamental rights, and that's why they're sort of like, that's why they've said it's no longer appropriate for the EU to be transferring data to the US under Privacy Shield anymore, because it's not sufficient. They don't have the right structure in place to protect individuals' fundamental rights.
Thank you. Yes, the Privacy Shield is something which really only affects several thousand US companies who self-registered under that. It doesn't have any impact on Australian, New Zealand or South African businesses, because it's more of a bipartite relationship between the EU that was originally negotiated as part of a trade deal in order to replace its predecessor, which was also problematic. So clearly Privacy Shield is interesting, but it's not necessarily even relevant to any of the people who are moving into the EU at this stage from outside the US. So it is a very interesting topic. But I think I would like to ask the panel generally, I think it's time to get out your crystal balls and polish them and say, we're now entering a period where there are tremendous challenges to the economy. Economies all over the world are going into free fall. We're seeing tremendous, horrific increases in unemployment. We're seeing whole sectors of business fall by the wayside as our society buckles under the pressure of this COVID virus. So what would you say are the key things that need to be done or taken into account when you're starting to enter this market, or you may already be established in the market? What are the things that are necessary to be done? And I'd like to begin with Julie, because Julie, I think, has some opinions in this area. Julie, what do you think?
Gosh, don't leave the easy questions for me. It's really hard to say, because I think obviously a lot of industries have been incredibly impacted by the pandemic and the economic challenges. But TrueLayer found, for example, we had an 800% increase in open banking payments during COVID lockdown, which is, even to my mind, is completely insane. But I think it just shows that certain businesses during this challenging time will sort of come up and thrive and see opportunities. So I think it's about, even though we are in a challenging time, we've seen challenging times before. There was a .com burst, if you're that old, if you're there was a GFC, and throughout all of these periods, we've had so many innovations and interesting companies that have popped up and made a real success of it.
Right, thank you. Stephen, I wonder if you have any views on this. What does your crystal ball tell you?
Companies that can innovate and move quickly survive. Companies that can fail fast survive. You can build a business on the cloud, and I then specifically say our cloud. It helps you do that. That means that you can discard the things that don't work and pivot quickly to new things. You can take the same approach as the DVD distributor who became the biggest global streaming giant. How good a choice did Disney make when Disney decided to launch Disney Plus at the start of a pandemic when the cinemas shut? You know, how all of these companies built organizational mechanisms to change themselves rapidly. How could we launch the Fire Phone? It was a commercial disaster. No one even remembers it. But then take those lessons and feed them into the team that went and built the Amazon Echo, for example, which is the most successful home device. You need to have a culture internally where mistakes are okay, where you can make short investments to say, does this work? It's not working, stop it. Our cloud platform helps people do that, because technology is the underpinning of everything that you do nowadays. There is no walking away from this. Rather than having to invest in servers and invest in long-term contracts, do short-term experiments, see what works. If you've got that culture, you can survive anything any market throws at you. This is my humble experience of working here and watching customers that we have be successful.
So you're suggesting that it's a particular mindset, a willingness to embrace and learn from failure, and to really focus on innovation, to
Yes.
build better ways of doing what needs to be done.
There's a reasonable bar here. If you find a company that has a department of innovation, then they're not an innovative company.
Right, it needs to be the DNA of
exactly. It should be, you know, build these things into your DNA. Have people write automation, not focus on manual tasks. You know, make these investments in you then, and investing in organizational capabilities that help you move fast when things unexpectedly happen and black swan events happen.
So
we're in the biggest of the black swans at the moment.
What's the typical profile of success? You must deal with a lot of businesses and you meet a lot of people. What is the profile that is the most associated with successfully achieving their goals of scaling, of being able to adapt to challenges? What would you look for in a person or a team, and what skills and experience or what attitudes do you feel are paramount in succeeding?
We're very lucky. Amazon has a set of leadership principles the company runs on, and what I found was I didn't have to drink any Kool-Aid, because it just turned out they were the sensible things to do. People should have backbone and challenge each other and challenge decisions, and then when a decision is made by a group, everyone should get behind the decision and run forward. People should have a bias for action. Many of the things that we do don't need long-term consideration. We talked about one-way and two-way doors. Where there is a two-way door in front of you, enable your people to go and make their own decisions. Get away from a command and control structure. Take those centralized things your company did, like security, and federate them so that everyone becomes an owner of everything in the company. You then end up with a culture where people have backbone, they take lots of ownership for things, and they trust each other. And in those environments, people tend to move much faster. My experience of being a management consultant all my career before joining here is that we move faster because the level of trust that we have in each other is much higher. You know, you don't have to nervously look at a colleague and think, will they do that? You've created a culture where everyone is an adult and everyone can get on and make their own decisions. And most of my customers that I see as being really innovative and really moving forward share those people values. I won't call them corporate values. It's about people. Is that a reasonable answer?
So Stephen, I'll stay with you just for a moment longer, because we've been focusing very much on people and understanding that aspect, but ultimately success or failure is going to be driven by technical choices, by your technology. Does your technology scale? How easy is it to change your direction or to innovate? How resilient is your infrastructure in dealing with some of the problems of demand, of scaling, dealing with failovers and massive demand? What would you say are the top tips necessary when you are putting together your technology platform, you're making your technology decisions? How would you solve this?
It's not a technical problem. It's the operating model that you deploy. You need to put in the capabilities in your org that can deal with that. And that does mean that you end up with good technology, but you've ended up with good technology because because the decision-making processes you ended up with were good ones. Look at resilience. Every single AWS region is at least 3 availability zones. So a region would be London. We've got 3 fully independent areas within the London metropolitan area. Each of those availability zones is multiple data centers. Now, you tell me of a single environmental thing that hurts that entire region, for example. We take lots of really quite hard and complex technology and make it easy for customers to consume it so that anyone can do it. Anyone can now do machine learning because we give you the tools. There's a great phrase now, encrypt like everyone is watching. Encrypt everything everywhere. Encryption is really difficult. We make it really simple for our customers, for example. Build an organization that can remove itself from thinking about vendors and thinking about technology and think about the things they want to get done And if you enable that, the right technology choices will be made. If you find yourself considering a big deal over a 6 months period when you're a startup company and what technology stack you could use, you're focusing on the wrong things. You know, nowadays people go down a rabbit hole saying, shall I use Kubernetes or Docker? Is that really adding customer value? You know, all of these things, because there are so many good frameworks that you can pick up now. You shouldn't be starting things from scratch. We have the AWS well-architected program, completely free advice that helps you measure performance, reliability, security, cost. Use these things to examine the technology choices you make to say, are we exposed? Do we have gaps? Are we fitting with what is a good model here? I mean, it seems funny, the guy from the technology company is saying don't focus on the technology, but again, that is the experience. Technology is replaceable. The wrong operating model is a much more difficult thing to change.
Right. I'd like to pivot away just for a moment from that and just focus on one aspect of the technology, and that is so-called artificial intelligence, machine learning space. And Casey, I'm going to throw this question to you because there's a significant part of GDPR in relation to profiling of individuals. And I noticed that this is an area where there's a lot of confusion, and I'm wondering if you can provide some clarity about this. What does GDPR say about the rights of individuals in respect to automated profiling? Go ahead.
Thanks for that difficult question there. I think what's important to sort of start off really is to say one of the introductions of GDPR, what they gave was a whole bunch of new rights to data subjects, which previously may have existed, some of them, but they were never enforced. And now companies really do need to be aware of these rights. So for example, data subjects now have the right to access the data that you have about them, request what you're processing, how, why, request a copy of it. And one of them also being the right to refuse to automated processing. So if a data subject were to come to you and find out that you do automated processing and they're not happy with that, they can absolutely tell you, they can absolutely ask for you to stop processing their data that way. Now, the issues that we have with our clients is sometimes that's a fundamental part of their business. In order to offer their services to that client, that needs to happen. So we do try to navigate around how they can get around this, how they can continue to offer their services to these individuals without the fully automated processing. And our best advice really is you need to still have some part of a human interaction in there, whether it's looking at, I think the best example that I can give right now off the top of my head, unfortunately, is, for example, recruitment agencies with CVs. You've got the automatic processing. As soon as you plug in a CV, you've got something that reads it completely and chucks in throws out CVs that are irrelevant and then only passes the ones on to human resources to review. Now, that's a common practice here in the UK that happens, and individuals unfortunately are losing out by that. So what they could do is to refuse to be able to do that. But some recruitment agencies, that's the way they operate, and would also then just refuse to hold your CV. So it is a bit of a balance of power there, that yes, the data subjects have got these great rights and can say yes or no to you processing their data, but at the same time, if a company, if that's the way they operate, they've got 100,000 other people who they can still use instead of your data. Does that make sense?
Right, thank you.
I think what I want to get across basically, yes, the data subjects, they've got all these rights, but the companies can still decide how and when you can use them.
Thank you. We have another question. This is from Andrew Stein. The question is, do UK companies, including the government, desire/prefer/mandate that data be stored in the UK? So ultimately, I think this is a data residency question. Is there any, because we know, for example, that the recent developments with TikTok is about data residency and the potential of government covert surveillance through widely deployed apps. We know that Russia, for example, mandates that if you're delivering digital services to its citizens, then the servers from which those services are deployed must be resident in Russian territory. So I guess Andrew was asking, is there anything similar in the UK, or is it only about GDPR compliance? And I saw Stephen nodding. Stephen, data residency. Yes, no, maybe.
No one cares. No one cares. I think people like to know it's in Europe. I don't think. I think, and I used to do a bit of this in government as well at one point as a management consultant. Britain always had this strong culture of data protection, for example, and I think people see GDPR as, by and large, the layman would see it as an extension of that. I think people want to know their data's safe. They don't necessarily seem to mind. I think the TikTok example is a great one of people worrying about their fun social media videos while ignoring the actual important data about their life. This is the old thing of people worry about government overreach and at the same time are happy that their supermarket can collect their entire life on a loyalty card. But I haven't came across a residency requirement much. There may be some in banking regulations, for example, as you look at the certain market transactions and things, sometimes you find strong residency about that data, but it's not related to GDPR and it's not related to privacy. It's more about banking regs.
Yeah, I noticed, for example, certain UK banks are now warning its customers in Europe that they are closing their accounts and cancelling their credit cards because of Brexit. So this is already starting to develop. And furthermore, my own experience is that certain customers are very sensitive to UK data residency, particularly in areas of government, law enforcement, policing, and security services. For that sector specifically, there's significant interest in data residency as a decision-making factor. But as you say, my own experience doesn't support that in the financial sector. We're getting close to the end of the time that's allotted to us. So I'd like to wrap up by inviting each of the panel to give a closing statement. What is the key message that each of you would like to leave with the viewers that encapsulates the most important things that they need to know? So, and I'd like to throw this to Julie. Julie, once again, dazzle.
Thanks, Paul. I think if you're all startups at the beginning or at the middle of the journey, I think with respect to data and how you manage it, I think it's really important to embed it through your culture. So I think you may not necessarily be in a position where you could afford an in-house lawyer or you could afford the top-notch legal advice, but I think it's super important to have a read of all of the guidance that's available if you're coming to the UK on the Information Commissioner's website. It's very comprehensive. Lawyers use it all the time, and it will take you through exactly what you need to do. And I think it's important to make sure that even if you don't have lawyers in-house, is to make sure your engineers understand the general principles that stand behind the GDPR and the data protection provisions, and to make sure that your marketing team understand it. And then as you grow, make sure you have systems that you can iterate on and that you can expand upon as you explode into massive growth. Because that process is difficult, as I found as well. It's really hard to, if you don't have the culture embedded at the beginning, it's very hard to go back and reel back and say, hang on a minute, guys, the way you've been doing this for the past 6 months is not right, and you need to fix it. But if you start with the right intentions at the beginning, it makes that process much easier for whoever comes in to help you scale and 10x your business effectively.
Thank you, Julie. Casey, your final thoughts.
So I would probably say GDPR has been perceived by many as a prohibitive to business or disproportionately costly, a very disproportionately costly exercise to the commercial gain that they would get. But from what I've seen from my clients coming across is a shift in their business perspective from being a compliance obligation to a business enabler, and unlocking that potential for your business to benefit from the responsible data use and data-driven innovation and use that as a competitive advantage rather than as a, this is going to cost me so much money and time. And essentially, I think it's about trust. Your customers trust you to look after their data. As long as you can show that and prove that, they'll remain loyal, I think, with you.
Thank you. And Stephen?
Your business on the cloud platform where the other fintechs have built their business, where the biggest banks in the world are building their new business, where Goldman's launched Apple Card, for example, is a very high watermark there. And then come and speak to us. Our team are risk and compliance and security experts all over the world. We're in APAC, we're in South America, we're in North America, we're in Europe. Come and tell us your plans, talk to us. We can give you advice, we're free. We help you understand how to take complex problems and simplify them so that when you go and seek your legal advice and everything else, you understand what you're doing. So all of these things come together. Take all this information that's available for you, shout at your AWS account manager and say, I want to speak to someone like Squig, get them in here. We would love to be your trusted advisor and help your company figure out how to grow.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you to Julie and Casey. Now, this is not the end of this session. This is merely the transition as we move to individual breakout rooms so that you as the viewers have an opportunity to talk a little bit longer with each of our esteemed panelists and perhaps drill down into some of the questions that have been raised. I'd like to leave you with some final thoughts. For me, at a personal level, GDPR is just one of several regulations. There's also PECR, which those of you who are engaging in electronic marketing need to be aware of because it has a significant influence and is very active in the Information Commissioner's Office investigation team. But really the focus for me is to respect that GDPR is about human rights. It's about the right to privacy of individuals, and that the businesses who are respecting those rights are going to be the ones that are successful in future, in my view. So I'd like to thank each of you for your time and interesting questions, and suggest that we now hand over back to Peter for the introduction of what will happen next in the breakout rooms. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Well moderated. We'll be chatting later, I'm sure. And of course, Julie, Casey, and Stephen, thank you for your insights and expertise. And before you move across to your virtual booths to be hopefully met by a number of the cohort, coming up at 9:30 BST, of course, is I think one of the best panels of the 2 weeks. It's founders, people that have made the journey from overseas markets into the UK, have learned a lot, got scar tissue experience, etc., and they'll be sharing those stories from 9:30. So please come back and have a good session in the booth. Thank you very much.